October 10th, 1904, 10:47 hours, 18,000 feet over Balikpapan, Borneo. Major Richard Ira Dick Bong sits in the cockpit of his P-38 Lightning, call sign Marge, scanning the sky ahead where B-24 Liberator bombers are approaching their target, oil refineries that supply 35% of Japan's aviation fuel. Bong is 24 years old, with 36 confirmed kills, already the highest-scoring American ace in the Pacific. He's flying his 146th combat mission, leading a flight of 4 P-38s, providing top cover for the bomber formation. Through his canopy, Bong spots them, 11 Japanese fighters, Nakajima, Ki-43, Oscars, climbing from below in a textbook intercept formation. The Japanese pilots are experienced, disciplined, maintaining tight formation as they climb toward the bombers. They haven't seen Bong's flight yet. The setup is perfect. Bong has altitude advantage, 2,000 feet above the Japanese formation. He has sun position, approaching from the west with the morning sun behind him, making his aircraft nearly invisible to the enemy. He has surprise. The Japanese are focused on the bombers, not watching above and behind, and he has 300 hours of combat experience that taught him exactly how to exploit all three advantages. Bong keys his radio. Ambush flight, this is Marge leader. 11 bandits, 4 o'clock low, climbing, we're going in. He rolls his P-38 inverted, pulls the stick back, and dives toward the Japanese formation at 400 mar. In the next 5 minutes and 12 seconds, Bong will shoot down 5 enemy aircraft, completing one of the rarest achievements in aerial combat, becoming an ace in a day, 5 kills in a single mission. Only 68 pilots in all of World War II would achieve this feat. And Bong's 5-minute engagement would become a textbook example of how experience, aircraft capability, and tactical positioning create overwhelming advantage. Birth of an ace, Richard Bong grew up on a farm near Poplar, Wisconsin, a small town where his father taught him to hunt deer in dense forests. Dad taught me that hunting isn't about shooting, Bong would later recall. It's about positioning. You don't chase deer through the woods. You figure out where they're going, get there first, and wait. When they walk into range, the shot is easy. That hunting philosophy would define Bong's approach to aerial combat. He learned to fly in 1938 through the civilian pilot training program, soloing after just 8 hours of instruction. His instructors noted that Bong had exceptional spatial awareness, an intuitive understanding of three-dimensional positioning that can't be taught. When war came, Bong enlisted in the Army Air Forces and entered flight training. He graduated in January 1942 and was assigned to P-38 Lightning training at Hamilton Field, California. The P-38 Lightning was unlike any fighter Bong had flown. Twin-engine, twin-boom design with a central nacelle, housing the pilot, powered by 2 Allison V1710 engines producing 1,000 horsepower each. Armed with 4 50 caliber machine guns and 120mm cannon, all nose-mounted, firing directly forward. Maximum speed, 414 mph at altitude. Service ceiling, 44,000 feet. Range, 100 miles with external tanks. The P-38 was fast, powerful, and heavily armed, but it was also challenging to fly. Asymmetric thrust from the counter-rotating propellers could cause control problems if one engine failed, and the aircraft's high wing loading made it less maneuverable than Japanese fighters in tight turns. Most pilots found the P-38 difficult to master. Bong found it perfect. The P-38 isn't a dogfighter, Bong told other pilots during training. You don't try to turn with zeros. You use speed and firepower. You dive from altitude, make one high-speed pass, and extend away before the enemy can react. If you try to dogfight in a P-38, you'll lose. But if you fight the P-38's way, boom and zoom, you're almost unbeatable. Bong arrived in the Southwest Pacific in September 1942, assigned to the 9th Fighter Squadron, 49th Fighter Group, based in Port Moresby, New Guinea. His first kill came on December 27, 1942. A Mitsubishi A6M Zero shot down over Buna during the New Guinea campaign. The engagement lasted 8 seconds. Bong dove from 15,000 feet, close to 400 yards, fired a 3-second burst, and watched the Zero explode. Then he extended away at full throttle before the other Zeros could engage him. It was exactly like deer hunting, Bong wrote in his diary that night. Position correctly, shoot once accurately, and the target goes down. No wasted motion, no unnecessary risk. Over the next 22 months, Bong refined this approach into a system. He studied Japanese tactics, learning their formations and defensive maneuvers. He practiced gunnery relentlessly until he could hit targets consistently at ranges up to 500 yards. He learned to read dogfights three-dimensionally, understanding not where aircraft were, but where they would be in 10 seconds. Most importantly, Bong developed an almost supernatural ability to assess tactical situations instantly. Other pilots would see a chaotic furball of fighters and feel overwhelmed. Bong would see opportunities, which enemy aircraft were vulnerable, which approach angles provided best shots, which escape routes were available if things went wrong. Bong saw the dogfight like a chess game, recalled Captain Thomas Lynch, who flew wing for Bong on multiple missions. While we were reacting to immediate threats, he was thinking 3 moves ahead. He knew where he wanted to be, how to get there, and what would happen after he shot. That kind of tactical thinking is what made him unstoppable. By October 1904, Bong had 36 confirmed kills, the highest score of any American pilot in any theater. He'd been awarded the Medal of Honor in December 1943 for shooting down 5 enemy aircraft in 1 week. He'd survived being shot down twice, once crash landing in enemy territory and evading Japanese patrols for 3 days before rescue. And he'd developed a reputation. Japanese pilots called him the fork-tailed devil because his P-38's distinctive twin-boom configuration was the last thing many of them saw before dying. Now, over Balikpapan on October 10, 1904, Bong was about to demonstrate why he was considered the best fighter pilot in the Pacific. The lightning advantage. The P-38 Lightning that Bong flew on October 10th was not a standard production aircraft. It was his personal P-38 J-15LO, serial number 42103-993, named Marge, after his fiancée Marjorie Vattendahl back in Wisconsin. Bong had Marge customized specifically for his combat style. The engines were tuned for maximum performance at medium altitude, 12,000, 20,000 feet, where most Pacific combat occurred. The gun harmonization was set for 400 yards convergence, closer than standard 600 yards, because Bong preferred to shoot at close range where hit probability was highest. The cockpit instruments were rearranged to put the most critical gauges, airspeed, altitude, fuel, in Bong's direct line of sight, and Bong's crew chief, Technical Sergeant Francis Lent, maintained Marge with obsessive care, ensuring every system functioned perfectly before every flight. Mr. Bong never asked me to do anything special, Lent recalled years later. He just asked me to make sure the airplane worked exactly the same way every time he flew it. He wanted consistency, no surprises. If the guns fired at a certain rate yesterday, they needed to fire at that exact rate today. That consistency let him focus entirely on tactics without worrying about mechanical issues. The P-38's nose armament, 40 caliber M2 Browning machine guns and 120mm M2 cannon, gave it devastating firepower when properly employed. The 50 caliber guns fired 800 rounds per minute each, using a mix of armor-piercing, incendiary, and tracer ammunition. The 20mm cannon fired 650 rounds per minute, using high-explosive shells effective against aircraft structures. All 5 weapons fired directly forward along the aircraft's center line, no convergence issues like wing-mounted guns. This meant that wherever Bong pointed his nose, all 5 weapons would hit the same point. At 400 yards, Bong's preferred firing range, a 1-second burst would put approximately 60 rounds into a target area, about 6 feet in diameter. No aircraft could survive that concentration of fire. But the P-38's real advantage wasn't firepower, it was energy management. The twin 1,475 horsepower engines gave the Lightning exceptional acceleration and climb rate. In level flight, the P-38 could accelerate from 200 mph to 350 mph in about 45 seconds, faster than any Japanese fighter. In a dive, the P-38 could reach 450 mph while maintaining control, speeds where Japanese fighters would begin to break apart. And in a climb, the P-38 could gain altitude at 3,000 feet per minute, allowing it to zoom climb after attacks, converting speed back into altitude. This energy management capability meant that P-38 pilots like Bong could control the terms of engagement. They could choose when to fight and when to disengage. They could attack with overwhelming speed, then escape before the enemy could respond. And they could maintain altitude advantage, the single most important factor in aerial combat. The P-38 isn't faster than a zero in a turn, and it isn't more maneuverable, Bong explained to new pilots, but it's faster in a straight line, and it can convert speed to altitude better than anything the Japanese have. That means you control the fight. You decide when to engage, from what angle, and when to break off. The Zero pilot just reacts to what you do, and by the time he reacts, you're already gone. On October 10, 1904, Bong would demonstrate this philosophy perfectly. 5 minutes of fury, 10:47 hours and 30 seconds. Bong's P-38 reaches 500 mph in his dive from 18,000 feet toward the Japanese formation at 16,000 feet. The Japanese pilots still haven't spotted him. They're focused on the B-24 bombers ahead and above. Bong selects his first target, a Ki-43 Oscar on the left side of the formation, slightly separated from the others. The pilot appears inexperienced. His spacing from the formation is too wide, his altitude slightly low. Bong angles his dive to approach from the Oscar's 7 o'clock, directly behind and below in the pilot's blind spot. At 600 yards, Bong's finger moves to the trigger. At 400 yards, he fires. First kill, 10:47:45. The concentrated firepower of 4 50 caliber guns and one 20mm cannon converges on the Oscar's fuselage. Tracers draw a line from Bong's nose to the enemy aircraft. Armor-piercing rounds punch through the Oscar's unarmored structure. Incendiary rounds ignite fuel in the Oscar's wing tanks. 20mm explosive shells detonate against the engine, destroying the cylinder heads. The Oscar's engine seizes. Black smoke pours from the cowling. The pilot, unable to maintain altitude with a dead engine, noses down and attempts to glide toward the coast. He won't make it. Bong doesn't watch. He's already transitioning to his next target. He pulls out of his dive at 15,000 feet, converting his excess speed into a zoom climb that takes him back up to 17,000 feet in 12 seconds. The Japanese formation has finally noticed him and is beginning to react, but Bong is already above them again, repositioning for his next attack. Second kill, 10:49:20. The Japanese formation has broken, pilots scattering in different directions, abandoning the bomber intercept to deal with Bong's threat. 3 Oscars are climbing toward Bong, trying to negate his altitude advantage. Bong recognizes the tactic. It's the correct response to his attack. But the Oscar pilots are climbing too steeply, bleeding off their airspeed to gain altitude quickly. This makes them vulnerable. Bong rolls inverted and pulls into a split S maneuver, diving inverted, then rolling upright while pulling through to convert the dive into level flight. The maneuver positions him perfectly behind the climbing Oscars. They're moving slowly, perhaps 100 mph, while Bong is accelerating through 350 mph. He selects the trailing Oscar and fires from 500 yards. The range is long, but the target is nearly stationary relative to Bong's closure rate. His burst walks up the Oscar's fuselage from tail to cockpit. The pilot slumps forward, killed by 50 caliber rounds that penetrated the thin seat armor. The Oscar rolls left and enters a spin, tumbling toward the jungle 15,000 feet below. Would you trust your training to dive into a formation of 11 enemy fighters or play it safe? Tell me in the comments. Third kill, 10:50:50. 2 Oscars, wingmen from the formation Bong just attacked, have reversed course and are diving toward him. They're trying to sandwich him, one from each side, forcing Bong to defend against both simultaneously. It's a good tactic, but Bong has fought this scenario dozens of times. He doesn't try to evade both attackers. Instead, he turns hard toward the left Oscar, committing to a head-on pass. The Japanese pilot, seeing a P-38 coming directly at him, has 2 choices: continue the head-on, which means mutually assured destruction, or break off. He breaks off, rolling right and diving away. This leaves the right Oscar attacking Bong's tail, but now without his wingman's support. Bong extends away from the right Oscar at full throttle, the P-38's superior speed opening the range rapidly. After 8 seconds, Bong is 20 yards ahead of the pursuing Oscar. He pulls into a climbing turn, a chandelle, converting speed into altitude while reversing course. The Oscar pilot tries to follow, but can't match the P-38's zoom climb. By the time the Oscar completes his turn, Bong is 3,000 feet above him and diving back down. The Oscar pilot realizes his mistake too late. Bong fires from 450 yards, a 2-second burst that shreds the Oscar's left wing. The wing separates from the fuselage. The Oscar tumbles sideways, uncontrollable, and breaks apart from G-forces. Fourth kill, 10:51:40. The Japanese formation is completely scattered now. Individual Oscars are fleeing in different directions, abandoning the fight. But one pilot, either exceptionally brave or desperate to protect his comrades, makes a final attack run on Bong. He dives from above, trying to use the same altitude advantage that Bong has been exploiting. But he's attacking a pilot with 39 confirmed kills and 146 combat missions of experience. Bong sees him coming. Rather than evading, Bong performs a rolling scissors maneuver, a series of alternating rolls and turns that create unpredictable motion while maintaining forward speed. The Oscar pilot fires twice, both bursts missing, as Bong's aircraft rolls and slips through the fire. After the second miss, the Oscar has lost energy and speed, trying to track Bong's maneuvers. Now Bong reverses, pulling hard to get behind the Oscar. The Japanese pilot realizes his situation and tries to dive away, but he's too low on energy. Bong closes to 300 yards and fires a short burst. The Oscar's cockpit disintegrates. The aircraft continues flying straight and level for 3 more seconds, then noses down as the dead pilot slumps over the controls. Fifth kill, 10:52:42. One Oscar remains in visual range, fleeing northeast toward Japanese-held territory, low and fast. Bong pursues. This isn't about the kill. Bong already has 4, an exceptional single-mission score, but experience taught him that fleeing pilots sometimes return to fight another day. Better to eliminate the threat completely. The chase lasts 90 seconds, Bong gradually closing the range as his P-38's superior speed overcomes the Oscar's head start. At 18,000 feet over the jungle, Bong closes to 400 yards. The Oscar pilot knows he's being overtaken but has nowhere to go. Diving low would make him vulnerable. Climbing would bleed speed. He takes the only option left. He jettisons his external fuel tank and executes a maximum G turn to the right. It's the correct defensive maneuver, forcing Bong into a turning fight where the lighter, more maneuverable Oscar has advantage. But Bong doesn't take the bait. He doesn't try to follow the Oscar's turn. Instead, he pulls into a high yo-yo, climbing above and behind the turning Oscar, then rolling back down to re-engage from a new angle. When he completes the maneuver, Bong is 600 yards behind the Oscar, with perfect position and the Oscar running out of energy from his defensive turn. Bong fires his final burst of the engagement. The Oscar's engine explodes. The pilot bails out. Bong sees the parachute open, and the Oscar crashes into the jungle. Time, 10:52 hours and 42 seconds. Total engagement duration, 5 minutes and 12 seconds. 5 enemy aircraft destroyed. 0 damage to Bong's aircraft. 16 rounds of 20mm ammunition remaining out of 150 loaded. Approximately 200 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition remaining out of 2,000 loaded. It was the most efficient aerial engagement of Bong's career. The cost of perfection. After the engagement, Bong's wingmen rejoined formation. None of them had fired a shot. The entire fight happened so quickly that they were still repositioning when Bong scored his 5th kill. "We couldn't keep up," recalled Lieutenant William Strand, who flew as Bong's number 3 that day. By the time we understood what was happening, Dick already had 2 kills. By the time we could position to support him, he had 4. He was operating on a completely different level, seeing opportunities we couldn't see, executing maneuvers we couldn't follow. It was like watching a masterclass in aerial combat compressed into 5 minutes. The flight returned to base at Tacloban, Philippines, landing at 13:20 hours. Bong's combat report, filed per standard procedure, described the engagement in characteristically understated language. Encountered 11 Ki-53 fighters at 16,000 feet, engaged from altitude advantage, destroyed 5 enemy aircraft through successive attack runs. No damage to friendly aircraft. Ammunition expended, approximately 100 rounds, 50 caliber, 134 rounds, 20mm. The report didn't mention that Bong had just completed one of the rarest achievements in aerial combat. It didn't mention that 5 Japanese pilots were dead because Bong executed perfect tactics flawlessly. It didn't mention that this was Bong's 41st confirmed kill, making him the highest scoring American ace of all time. To Bong, it was just another mission. But to the men who analyzed aerial combat for tactical lessons, Bong's 5-minute engagement became legendary. The Army Air Force's Combat Analysis Board reviewed Bong's gun camera footage and combat reports, identifying key factors in his success. Tactical positioning. Bong achieved altitude, sun, and surprise before engaging, ensuring overwhelming initial advantage. Energy management. Bong never allowed his speed to drop below 300 mph, maintaining energy that could be converted to altitude or maneuverability as needed. Target selection. Bong attacked vulnerable targets first. Separated aircraft, inexperienced pilots, aircraft low on energy, rather than engaging the most threatening targets. Ammunition discipline. Bong fired short, accurate bursts rather than spraying wildly, conserving ammunition while achieving high hit probability. Situational awareness. Bong maintained awareness of all threats throughout the engagement, never fixating on one target while other threats remained. The analysis concluded, Major Bong's engagement demonstrates that experienced pilots with superior aircraft and proper tactics can achieve overwhelming air superiority even against numerically superior forces. But the analysis missed something important. What made Bong exceptional wasn't just his tactical skill, it was his emotional control. Dick never got excited, recalled his crew chief, Sergeant Lent. After a mission where he'd shot down 3 planes and been shot at by 50 anti-aircraft guns, he'd climb out of his plane like he'd just been on a training flight. Calm, relaxed, ready to do it again tomorrow. Most pilots came back from combat shaking, adrenaline pumping, talking fast. Dick came back like he'd been on a Sunday drive. This emotional control allowed Bong to make rational decisions under extreme stress. While other pilots fixated on single targets or panicked when outnumbered, Bong assessed situations coldly and executed optimal tactics regardless of circumstances. It was the same mindset his father taught him when hunting deer in Wisconsin. Stay calm, think clearly, execute deliberately. That mindset made him the deadliest aerial hunter of World War II. The final flight. After the October 10th engagement, Bong's confirmed kill total stood at 40, breaking Eddie Rickenbacker's World War I record of 26 kills and establishing Bong as America's ace of aces. General Douglas MacArthur personally congratulated Bong and recommended him for immediate return to the United States. "You've done enough," MacArthur told him. "Let younger pilots have their chance. Go home, marry that girl, and enjoy the recognition you've earned." Bong agreed. He flew his last combat mission on December 17, 1944, his 200th mission, and returned to the United States in January 1945. He married Marjorie Vattendahl on February 10, 1945, in Superior, Wisconsin. Newspapers across America covered the wedding. America's Ace of Aces weds, sweetheart named on his plane. Bong was assigned to test pilot duties at Lockheed's Burbank, California facility, evaluating new fighter designs, including the revolutionary P-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter. On August 6, 1945, the same day the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, Bong took off from Burbank in a P-80A for a routine test flight. At 2:30 p.m., shortly after takeoff, the P-80's fuel pump malfunctioned. The engine flamed out at 300 feet altitude, too low to successfully restart or bail out safely. Bong attempted an emergency landing, but couldn't reach the runway. The P-80 crashed into a North Hollywood street. Richard Ira Bong, America's ace of aces with 40 confirmed kills, died instantly. He was 24 years old. He'd survived 200 combat missions over 3 years of war. He'd been shot down twice and survived both times. He'd fought some of the most experienced Japanese pilots in the Pacific and defeated them all. He died in a peacetime accident, testing an aircraft that would never see combat, 8 days before Japan surrendered. The irony wasn't lost on those who knew him. "Dick survived the war," said Captain Thomas Lynch at Bong's funeral. "He outfought everyone Japan sent against him. Then he died because a fuel pump failed on a test flight. There's no justice in that. Just kakuda cruel randomness." Marjorie Bong, married to Dick for less than 6 months, never remarried. She kept his medals, his flight logs, and his letters for the rest of her life. When she died in 2003, she was buried next to Dick in Poplar, Wisconsin. Legacy in the sky, Richard Bong's 40 confirmed kills remain the highest score of any American fighter pilot in history. No pilot in Korea, Vietnam, or any subsequent conflict has exceeded that record. The reason isn't that modern pilots are less skilled, it's that modern warfare changed. Air-to-air combat after World War II became increasingly rare as surface-to-air missiles and beyond visual range weapons replaced dogfighting. Bong's record represents an era when aerial combat was visual, close range, and personal, when pilot skill directly translated to kills. The lessons from Bong's career influenced fighter tactics for decades. His emphasis on altitude advantage, energy management, and boom and zoom tactics became standard doctrine taught at every fighter weapons school. The U.S. Air Force's Fighter Weapons School, now known as the USAF Weapons School, uses Bong's October 10th engagement as a case study in optimal fighter tactics. Students analyze his positioning, target selection, and energy management, learning principles that remain relevant even in modern air combat. Bong's P-38 Marge was returned to the United States and eventually went to a museum, but was destroyed in a hangar fire in 1960. However, Bong's flight gear, his leather jacket, goggles, and personal sidearm are preserved at the Richard Wurster's Bong Veterans Historical Center in Superior, Wisconsin. The center, opened in 2002, tells Bong's story and educates visitors about World War II aviation. Over 40,000 people visit annually to learn about the farm boy from Wisconsin who became the deadliest American fighter pilot in history. In 2022, the Air Force named its newest fighter pilot training squadron the Bong Squadron in his honor. New fighter pilots, flying F-35s and F-22s, learn about the tactics that Bong pioneered 80 years ago. Because the fundamental principles of air combat haven't changed. Achieve positional advantage, maintain energy, select vulnerable targets, execute with precision. Bong mastered those principles so completely that he achieved what most pilots can only imagine: 5 kills in 5 minutes, perfect execution under pressure, and survival through 200 combat missions. In dogfighting, would you rather have superior aircraft or superior pilot skill? I'm curious what you think. The man behind the ace, letters that Bong wrote to Marjorie during his combat tours, reveal a man quite different from the legendary ace. He wrote about missing Wisconsin's changing seasons, about worrying that the war would change him into someone she wouldn't recognize, about feeling guilty that he survived missions where other pilots died. "I shot down 2 more planes today," he wrote after one mission. "That makes 28 total. Everyone's excited, talking about records and medals, but I keep thinking about the 2 Japanese pilots. They had families too, girlfriends or wives waiting for them to come home, and they're not coming home because I was better at killing than they were. I know that's what war is. I know we're fighting for important reasons, but it doesn't make me feel good about it." These letters reveal that Bong's emotional control wasn't sociopathy, it was compartmentalization. He could be coldly efficient in combat because he processed the emotional weight of killing separately, privately, in letters to the woman he loved. Dick never talked about his kills with other pilots, recalled Lieutenant Strand. He'd file his combat report, answer any questions from intelligence, and then he was done. He didn't brag, didn't relive the fights, didn't seem to take pride in the numbers. It was like he saw aerial combat as a job that needed doing, not a competition to see who could kill the most. This attitude made Bong respected, rather than resented by other pilots. In a culture where many aces cultivated aggressive, competitive personas, Bong remained humble and supportive of younger pilots. He spent hours teaching new pilots his tactics, sharing lessons learned, and helping them survive their early missions. Bong could have kept his knowledge to himself, said one pilot he mentored. That would have protected his status as top ace. But he shared everything because he cared more about other pilots surviving than about maintaining his kill count. That generosity probably saved dozens of lives. When Bong died in the P-80 crash, over 5,000 people attended his funeral in Poplar, Wisconsin. Among them were dozens of pilots he'd mentored, crew chiefs he'd worked with, and families of men he'd saved by teaching them how to survive. 5 minutes, 5 kills. One pilot who understood that aerial combat isn't about courage or aggression. It's about positioning, energy management, and cold calculation. Richard Bong survived 200 combat missions because he fought intelligently rather than bravely. He shot down 40 enemy aircraft because he executed optimal tactics flawlessly rather than relying on luck. And he died at 24 because even the best pilot in the world couldn't overcome mechanical failure at 300 feet altitude. His 5-minute engagement over Balikpapan wasn't just a display of skill. It was proof that experience, training, and aircraft capability, properly combined, create overwhelming advantage. That war rewards those who prepare, adapt, and execute, and that the difference between legends and casualties is often measured in fractions of seconds and degrees of positioning. These stories of skill, sacrifice, and the price of excellence deserve to be remembered. Subscribe so they never fade into history. Next time, the battleship that became target practice, and the test that proved American naval aviation had made surface fleets obsolete.